Welcome, students, to this new story from the book Vistas. The fifth chapter of your book Vistas, Should Wizard Hit Mommy? It is a very interesting story. Here I will tell you something before we start reading. Joe's father, Jack, told her a story every evening. Each new story was a slight variation of a basic tale. A small creature, usually named Roger, had some problem and went with it to do the wise old owl. The owl told him to go to the wizard, and the wizard performed a magic spell that solved the problem. Roger then felt happy and played many games with other creatures and went home to his mother just in time to hear the whistle of the train that brought his daddy home from Boston. The narrator wanted to impress upon Joe that the little shrunk loved his mommy more than he loved all other little animals, and she knew what was right. However, Jo had her own view about the world. She insisted that her father should end the story the other way round. It was not Roger's mommy that hit the wizard, but the wizard who hit mommy. The story involves a difficult question. So now let us read the story. In the evening and for Saturday naps, little like today, Jack told his daughter Jo a story out of his head. This custom began when she was 2. She was itself now nearly 2 years old, and his head felt empty. Each day story was a slight variation of the basic tale. A small creature, Roger, usually named Roger Fish, Roger Squirrel, Roger Chipmunky, had some problem and went with it to the wise old owl. The owl told him to go to the wizard, and the wizard performed a magic spell that solved the problem, demanding in payment a number of pennies greater than the number that Roger creature had. But in the same breath, directing the animal to a place where the extra pennies could be found. Then Roger was so happy he played many games with other creatures and went home to his mother just in time to hear the train whistle that brought his daddy home from Boston. Jack described their supper, and the story was over. Working his way through the scheme was especially fatiguing on Saturday because Joe never felt asleep in nap anymore, and knowing this made the ride seem futile. The little girl, not so little anymore, the bumps her feet made under the cover were halfway down the bed. Their big double bed that they let her to be in for naps, and when she was sick had at, at last arranged herself, and from the way her face fat face deep in the pillow shone in the sunlight, suffering through the drawn shade. It down not seem fantastic that some magic would occur and she would take her nap like an infant of 2. Her brother Bobby was 2 and already asleep with his bottle. Jack asked, "Who shall the story be about?" "Roger." Jo quizzed, her eyes shut and smiled to be thinking. She was thinking. Her eyes opened. Her mother's blue shrunk from the filming. A new animal they must talk about shrunks at nursery school. Having a fish here momentarily stirred Jack to creative enthusiastic all night, he said. Once upon a time, in the deep dark wood, there was a tiny little creature by the name of Roger Shrunk, and he smelled very bad. Yes, Joe said, he smelled so bad that none of the other little woodland creature would play with him. Joe looked at him suddenly, solemnly. She hadn't foreseen him. Whenever he would go out to play, Jack continued with zest, remembering certain humiliations of his own childhood. All of the other tiny animals would cry, "Hoo ho, here comes Roger's stinking stunk," and they would run away, and Roger Shunk would stand there all alone, and two little round would tears would fall from his eyes. The corner of Joe's mouth dropped down, and her lower lip bent towards as he traced with a forefinger along the side of a nose and the course of one of Joe's shrunk tears. "Won't he see the owl?" she asked in a high and faintly roughed voice. Sitting on the bed beside her, Jack felt the cover tag as her legs swished tensely. He was pleased with his moment. He was telling her something true, something she must know, and had no wish to hurry on. But downstairs a chair scraped, and he realized he must get down to help Claire paint the living room woodwork. Well, he walked along very sadly and came to a very big tree, and in the tip top of the tree was an enormous wise old owl. So there was a tree, and there was an old owl who used to answer all the questions. "Mr. Owl," Roger Shrunk said, "all the other little animals run away from me because I smell so bad." "So do you," the owl said. "Very, very bad. What can I do?" Roger Shrunk said, and he cried very hard. The wizard," Joe shouted, and sat right up, and a little golden book spilled from the bed. "Now, Joe, Daddy's telling the story. Do you want to tell Daddy the story?" "No." "You me? Then lie down and be sleepy." Her head relapsed into the pillow, and she said, "Out of your head." Well, the owl thought and thought. At last he said, Well, the owl thought and thought. At last he said, "Why don't you go see the wizard, Daddy?" "What? Our magic spell real?" This was a new phase just this last month, a reality phase. When he told her spiders eat bugs, she turned to her mother and asked, "Do you really?" And when Claire told her God was in the sky and all around them, she turned to her father and insisted with a sly yet eager smile, "Is he really?" So they were discussing about some stories in this chapter, and the owl used to tell some stories to the young Roger. "They are real in stories," Jack answered currently. She had made him miss a bit in the narrative. The owl said, "Go through the dark woods under the apple tree into the swamp over the creek." "What is a creek?" "A little river over the creek, and there will be the wizard's house." And that's the way Roger Shrunk went, and pretty soon he came to a little white house and he rapped on the door. Jack rapped on the windows still, and under the covers Joe's tall figure clenched in an infantile thrill, and then a tiny little old man came out with a long white beard and a pointed blue hat, and said, "Ah, what's it?" Watcher went. "You smell awful." The wizard's voice was one of Jack's own favorite effect. So now they came and saw the wizard, and the wizard said that you are smelling very awful. The wizard's voice was one of Jack's own favorite effect. He did it by scrunching up his face and somehow winning through his eyes, which felt for the internal rheumy. He felt being an old man suited him. "I know it," Roger Shrunk said, "and all the little animals run away from me." The enormous wise owl said, "You could help me." "Ah, well, maybe. Come on in. Don't get too close now." Inside Joe there were all these magic things, all jumbled together in a big dusty heap, because the wizard did not have any cleaning lady. Why? Why? Because he was a wizard and a very old man. Wizard means a magician, and a very will he die? No, wizards don't die. Well, he rumored around and found an old stick called a magic wand. So, what is a magic wand? It is a stick that the magicians keep with themselves. And asked Roger Shrunk what he wanted to smell like. Roger thought and said, "Roses." "Yes, good," Joe said smugly. Jack fixed her with a trance like grace and chanted in the wizard's elderly, irritable voice. "Acracadably, horse, foo." Roger Shrunk, "How do you do?" Roses, roses, full and ear, pull and ear. Roger Shrunk, "You never fear." Bing. He paused as a rapt expression within awe widened out from his daughter's nostril, forcing her eyebrows up and her lower lip down in a wide, noiseless grin, an expression in which Jack was startled to recognize his wife flirting pleasure at cocktail parties, and all of a sudden he whispered the whole inside of the wizard's house was full of smell of roses, roses. Roger Fish cried, and the wizard said, very cranky, that'll be 7 pennies, Daddy. What? Roger shrunk. You said Roger Fish? Yes, shrunk. You said Roger Fish. Wasn't that silly? Very silly of your stupid old daddy. Where was I? Well, you know about the pennies, says it. Okay, Roger shrunk, said, but all I have is 4 pennies, and he began to cry. Joe made the crying face again, but this time without a trace of sincerity. This annoyed Jack downstairs. Some more furniture rumbled. Claire, shouldn't more heavy things? She was 6 months pregnant. It would be their third. So the wizard said, oh, very well. Go to the end of the lane and turn around 3 times and look down the magic well, and there you will find 3 pennies. Hurry up. So Roger Shrunk went to the end of the lane and turned around 3 times, and there in the magic well were 3 pennies. So he took them back to the wizard and was very happy and ran out into the wood, and all the other little animals gathered around him because he smelled so good. And they played tag, basketball, football, baseball, lacrosse, hockey, soccer, and pick up sticks. What's pick up sticks? It is a game you play with sticks, like the wizard's magic wand, kind of. And they played games and laughed all afternoon, and then it began to get dark, and they all ran home to their mommies. Jo was starting to fuss with her hand and look out of the window at the crack of the day that showered under the shade. She thought the story was all over. Jack didn't like women when they took anything for granted. He liked them apprehensive, hanging on his words. Now, Jo, are you listening? Yes, because this is very interesting. Roger Shrunk's mommy said, what's that awful smell? What? And Roger Shrunk said, it's me, Mommy. I smell like roses. And she said, I smell like roses. And she said, who made you smell like that? And he said, the wizard. And she said, well, of all the nerve, you come with me, and we are going right back to that very awful wizard. Jo sat up, her hand dabbling in the air with a genuine fright. But Daddy, then he said, about the little animals run away. Her hand skittered off into the underbrush. All right, he said, but Mommy, all the other little animals run away. And she said, I don't care. You smell the way a little shrunk should have, and I'm going to take you right back to that wizard. And she took an umbrella and went back with Roger Shrunk and hit that wizard right over the head. No, Joe said, and put her hand out to touch his lips, even when in her agitation did not quite dare to stop the source of truth. Inspirations came to her. Then the wizard hit her on the head and said that change, and did not change that little shrunk back. No, he said. The wizard said, okay, and Roger Shrunk did not smell of roses anymore. He smelled very bad again. But the other little autumn, oh, Omen, Joe, it's Daddy's story. Shall Daddy not tell you any more stories? Her broad face looked at him through though shifted light astone. This is what happened then. Roger Shrunk and his mommy went home, and they heard woo woo woo, and it was the choo choo train bringing Daddy Shrunk home from Boston, and they had lima beans, celery liver, smashed potatoes, and pie. Oh my, for dessert! And when Roger Shrunk was in bed, Mommy Shrunk came up and hugged him and said he smelled like her little baby shrunk again, and she loved him very much, and that's the end of the story. But Daddy, what then did the little other animals run away? No, because eventually they got used to the way he was and did not mind it all. What is even sheltered in the little whistle? That was a stupid mommy. It was not, he said with rare emphasis, and believed from her expression that she realized she was defending his own mother to her, or something as odd. Now I want you to put your big heavy head on the pillow and have a good long nap. He adjusts the shade so not even a crack of the day showed, and up to the door and tiptoed to the door in the pretense that she was already asleep. But when he turned, she was crouching on top of the covers and starting staring at him. Hey, get under the cover and fall fast asleep. Bobby, asleep. She stood and the bounced gingerly on the spring. Daddy, what? Tomorrow I want you to tell me the story that wizard took that magic wand and hit that mommy. Her plump arms chopped forcefully right over the head. No, that's not the story. The point is that the little shrunk loved his mommy more than he loved all other little animals, and she knew what was right. No, tomorrow you say he hit that mommy. Do it. She kicked her leg up and sat down on the bed with a great heave and complained of spring, and she had done hundreds of time before, except that this time she did not laugh. Say it, Daddy. Well, we'll see. Now at least have a rest. Stay on the Stay on the bed. You are a good girl. He closed the door and went downstairs. Claire had spread the newspaper and opened the paint can and wearing an old shirt on top of her maternity mop was stroking the chair rail with a dipped brush above him. Footstep vibrant, and he called, "Joe, shall I come up there and spank you?" The footstep hesitated. "That was a long story," Claire said. "The poor kick," he answered, and with utter weariness watched his wife's labor. The wood mark, a cage of modeling and rails and baseboard all around them, was half old tan and half new ivory, and he felt caught in the ugly middle position. And though he as well felt his wife's presence in the cage with him, he did not want to speak with her word, with her touch, her anything. So, this was a story about children getting learning something new from their parents, and their parents used to tell them a story about the wizard, and in this way you see how parents teach their children something new every day from a story. So, in the end, let us see what was the question. Claire observed that it was a long story. He simply said, "The poor kid." He watched his wife working hard on the woodwork. It included a cage of molding and rails and baseboard all around them. He felt caught in an ugly middle position. He also felt his wife's presence in the cage with him. But he did not want to speak with her, work with her, touch her, anything. He watched everything with utter weariness. Thank you, students. बहुत छोटो করে দিয়েছি यार